Consider this, college football fans. Anything won of any consequence on the national landscape since 2015 has been won by the SEC or Clemson. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We are running a series in which we are matching up schools against their would-be conferences. So with all the conference realignment talk concerning specifically the Pac-12 and the Big 12 going back and forth there, and then on the other side of the country, the ACC and its top-tier schools going to either the Big 10 or the SEC, we are not discussing the probabilities and the logistics and all the ramifications and the legalities involving that right now. We've done that in previous videos, on previous live streams. This is simply about if it happened, what would it look like? Clemson versus the Big 10. We have produced that video. Please check it out. Clemson versus the SEC. It has been a long and storied recent history between these two entities, with Clemson with rivalries against, of course, South Carolina each and every year that's played for the Palmetto State Championship, and against Georgia. That's a familiar series, and Clemson running into the SEC in bowl games, and most recently for the past 9 years in the college football playoff. Clemson has lost 3 consecutive games to the SEC, 2 in 2022. So Clemson, despite winning the ACC and going 9-0 against its own conference, lost at the South Carolina Gamecocks for the first time in a long time. That Gamecocks team finished at 8-5, a 31-30 finish there. Clemson gave Cade Klubnik the start against Tennessee in the Orange Bowl and fell 31-14 to a really good Vols team. In 2021, little did we know at the time, JT Daniels, the starting quarterback for Georgia, DJ Uiagalelei, the starting quarterback for Clemson for the first time as the starter and not filling in. And Clemson only scored a field goal and lost 10-3 to the eventual national champions. As we run through the years, we see the dominance over South Carolina since 2014. We see the games home and home against Texas A&M in 2018 and 2019, 2 pretty good ball games there. We also see the national championship game, of course, against LSU, in which Clemson was within 28-25, but the Tigers took it home 42-25 for a perfect 15-0 national championship season. The national title game of 2018, Clemson routed Bama 44-16 in Nick Saban's most humbling performance as Alabama coach on a big stage. The Auburn series, we see it there in 2016 and 2017. The Tigers got a sweep over the Auburn Tigers and 2 pretty good Auburn teams, the second of which went to the SEC championship game. Clemson's famed series against Alabama, of course, started in 2015 with a national championship game lost despite Deshaun Watson's heroics with over 500 yards of total offense against Bama in 2015. Clemson won it in 2016, coming back from 14 down as Deshaun Watson, of course, got it done in the fourth quarter, and Hunter Renfrow scored the game winner. 2017 was a playoff loss against Bama, of course, with Kelly Bryant at quarterback. We see in earlier years there were more games against Georgia, as that series produced 2 really good ball games in 2013 and 2014 against Mark Richt's Georgia Bulldogs. The 2012 Clemson Tigers defeated a bad Auburn team that finished at 3-9, an opening weekend game in Atlanta. And then Clemson fans will want to forget that prior to the long winning streak against South Carolina recently, they lost 5 consecutive to the Gamecocks and Steve Spurrier. Those 2011, 12, and 13 Gamecock teams were really good at 11 wins each season. That 2012 game, of course, in the Peach Bowl against LSU was a classic on a 4th and 18 conversion on the final drive to defeat LSU 25-24. Clemson matched up favorably against the national championship Auburn team of 2010 that went 14-0, barely losing 27-24 on the Plains. Good effort there. You see them take on a South Carolina team and losing. That Gamecock team in 2010 marched on to its only SEC championship game appearance. We see some additional postseason appearances against the SEC, namely Kentucky in 2009, a 21-13 win over the Cats. Clemson met Nick Saban's second team and first really good Bama team that marched all the way to 12 consecutive wins, including a 34-10 win over Clemson 1 year before Dabo Swinney took it over, of course, and Tommy Bowden was still manning the sidelines. And also a loss to Kentucky. The Cats finished at 8-5, 28-20 in the 2006 bowl game. And amidst all the games against South Carolina and more Georgia series games, the Clemson Tigers went up against 2 would-be SEC teams in the mid-2000s. They beat Missouri in 2000, 62-9. home and home against Texas A&M, splitting that series, and then a bowl game win in the Chick-fil-A Bowl against Tennessee, a Vols team that finished 10-3 under Philip Fulmer, 27-14. In many of these matchups, team versus conference, we don't have a whole lot to go on over the past 20-plus seasons going back to the year 2000. But for Clemson, they play the SEC a lot. 48 games, and Clemson's won 28 of the 48, 5-5 in postseason play. Clemson only 9-17 against ranked teams. You can blame the pre-Dabo Sweeney era for that for the most part. That means that they've also had a tremendous record of 19-3 against non-ranked teams out of the SEC. The record against South Carolina total is 14-8. The Clemson teams of most of the 2000s were 7-5, 8-4 kind of teams most of the time. Then we had the Dabo Sweeney surge and the Clemson rise to the elite status that they enjoy right now, winning 11 and 12 games per year, contending for national championships. And that has meant the decisive nature of the gap between the record of Clemson's teams facing the SEC and what the SEC has produced. So Clemson going 28-20 against the SEC makes a whole lot of sense when you look at the records, because the SEC teams have been really good. Obviously, most of Clemson's matchups against the SEC in the Dabo Sweeney era have been huge games and big moments, but they've also been better than the Texas A&M and Auburn teams that they faced home and home. So all told, during this massive run of games since the year 2000, Clemson has been roughly about 70 games better than the SEC teams that they've faced. Since the year 2000, the ACC situation has been pretty clear-cut. Entering the century, Florida State was the dominant program. They barely lost a game. They played in the BCS championship game in 2000, and they owned the league. And then there was a transition period in which the likes of Virginia Tech in particular forged their way to the top of the ACC. And then we saw a transition period after Florida State won the BCS championship game again in 2013, where the two programs met and they transitioned, and Clemson surpassed Florida State, and that's been the situation ever since 2015. All told, since the year 2000, Clemson has a substantial lead over Florida State as the best program of the century in the ACC at 227-78. Check out the Florida State numbers on the Florida State videos to see where they rank, but it's about 7 to 8 percentage points behind Clemson, both in the ACC and total games, as the Tigers are 137-48 in the ACC. That includes 60-5 over the past 65 games against conference play. 2 national championships, 6 college football playoff appearances, 14-12 in bowl games, top 25 finishes, 17 top 10 finishes. 7 seems a bit low because basically they went on a run, and all 7 top 10 finishes minus 2014 were all consecutively, and Clemson has now edged out Florida State with the most ACC championships since the year 2000. Who would Clemson be right now in the SEC? Well, over the past couple seasons, 10-11 wins in the ACC translates to a lesser record in the SEC against a much tougher conference schedule. Ole Miss, Mississippi State, that's about where Clemson is right this second based on those 2 results, but I'm not going to magnify those as being what the program is. I don't believe Clemson has fallen off that far. However, are they playing Georgia, Alabama level football right now? No, they are not and have not since 2020, arguably. So Clemson would have a daunting task in the SEC, but of course they would be a force to be reckoned with. At their best, they are elite, creme de la creme, arguably the best program in the country, but they've fallen off that perch and need to prove that they are once again elite. Your thoughts about the Clemson program moving to the SEC? Again, different discussion here. The possibilities of moving to the SEC or the Big Ten versus what would the results be? What would this program look like year to year in competition against the SEC? We talk it up right here every day with you at the Voice of College Football.